Welcome to this week's Parsha Shir, Parshas Yisro. Four beautiful offerings to share with you. The first is something which we mentioned in the past. I mentioned it maybe a year or two ago, but I've come across the source of who says it. It's very nice to go through it inside, and he adds some points that I don't think I mentioned. So the first idea is this: Yisro, which of course is the name of the Sedra, comes along and gives thanks. He says famously, "Vayome Yisro Baruch Hashem Asher Hitzel Eschem Miyad Mitzrayim uMiyad Paro." Thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for saving you from the hands of Mitzrayim and from Paro. The Gemara says in Sanhedrin Sadi Daled Amud Aleph, Tana Mishum Repapayas, Ganaihu LeMoshe V'Shishim Ribui. It's a disgrace for Moshe Rabbeinu and for the whole of Klal Yisrael, 600,000 men, Shaloi Omru Baruch At Shebo Yisro V'Amar Baruch Hashem, that no one said thank you until Yisro came along and said Baruch Hashem. That's what the Gemara says in Sanhedrin. It seems a very strange Gemara. Moshe Rabbeinu and Klal Yisrael had never said thank you before. Last week's Parsha, B'Shalach, is Shabbos Shira. They had sang a song of gratitude to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Oz Yoshim Moshe, and the women sang as well. How can the Gemara say, Shalei Omru Shira, Shalei Omru Baruch, Ad Shebo Yisro V'Amar Baruch Hashem? What's the approach? So in past years, we've given different explanations, but last year or the year before, I mentioned an idea, but I saw that it's actually the Ksav Sofer. The Ksav Sofer says this idea, and he says it in the drashas. This happens to be a drasha l'Shabbos HaGadol in Shnas Tov Reish Vav, which is I think in the mid 1800s. The Ksav Sofer said this. Let me read it to you inside. V'hinei Yisro Omer Baruch v'hoidel Hashem al atzolis Yisrael asher lo hagia elov rak yisarav b'simchas acherim. The uniqueness of Yisro's thanks was that he gave thanks not for something that happened to him, but for something that happened to other people. Avol Yisrael k'shamru shira, when they said Shir al Hayom in last week's Sedra, lo yomru al atzolas acherim, it wasn't thanking HaKadosh Baruch Hu for things he had done for other people. Rag kol echad somach v'nosen shevach l'Hashem al atzolas atzmai. It was just for themselves, which is fine, which is very beautiful, but it's a different level. It wasn't giving thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for something which had happened to other people. V'hein hei divrei Chazal, and that's pshat in the Gemara. Genai li Yisrael shalom Baruch Ad Shebo Yisro V'Amar Baruch Hainu she Yisro Amar Baruch Hashem Asher Hitzel Eschem v'heim lo yomru rak al atzmom shavchu v'hoidu v'kanal ba'osi shapeh. That's exactly what the Gemara means. That Yisro came along and went one stage further. He thanked HaKadosh Baruch Hu not for something that happened to him, but that happened to other people. Now listen to what the Ksav Sofer then adds. V'hinei. This is the second paragraph of the third box on the page. If you're listening online, please email me at j.golker@gmail.com. I'll send you the handout. Says the Ksav Sofer. V'hinei. Mitzvah lehishtatef im chaveiroi. There is a mitzvah to empathize and to join together with your friend. Hein b'tzaroi, hein b'simchasoi v'atzlachasoi. Whether when he's going through bad times, in times of distress, or in times of simcha and success. Uchsiv, and the Pasuk says, v'ahavta l'recha kamocha. Don't we need support and empathy in good times and bad? Umisha mishtatif b'tzara shechavera v'libo olov dvoy. But if someone who empathizes and supports his friend who's going through a difficult time, yaseh kol hispalus l'mayit yagonev anchosoi. He should do whatever he can to share the distress and the anguish that person is going through. To restore that broken heart as much as possible. Not that he just ignores it and doesn't care. The beautiful pasuk in Parsha Rabbi, that you should rejoice in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you with your family, and Avtecha v'Moscha, and Hager v'Yosem v'Amon asher b'kirbecha, hainu, nesunim hema b'kerev libcha, asher ato mishtatif b'tzaram mitzape l'sameach yosom, u'v'simchosum yisamach libcha gam ato. If you rejoice in the welfare and the success and the happiness of others, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu will be misameach you. So it's a very beautiful answer to the question that the difference, the uniqueness of Yisro's baruch, of his thanks, was not because it was to him, it was to other people, which is a very lofty level. Essentially, that a person should be at one with his friend and be there for him or her in good times and in less good times. Okay, and I had that recently, that Baruch Hashem, one of the Rebbes in Beis, after going through a difficult period in his life where he was divorced and then he was on his own for a number of years, and Baruch Hashem, he's now got engaged. The simcha that the students felt and his colleagues, myself and other Rabbeim felt, was palpable when we went to the Vot and the L'chaim and the dancing and the singing. It was really, people were simcha for him. He's a very special person, and please God, he should continue to have simchas. But that's really what it's referring to. Okay, let's press on. Came across a very beautiful idea that Rabbi Hartman mentioned, and it's actually an Avnei Nezer. The pasuk says in last week's Sedra, "Uparoi hikriv," when Klal Yisrael was stuck at the Yam Suf. "Vayisu bnei Yisrael saneim v'hinei Mitzrayim nesei acharem v'yiru ma'od v'yitzaku bnei Yisrael Hashem." The famous pasuk that Klal Yisrael are stuck, as it were, between the devil and the deep blue sea. They're stuck, the Yam Suf in front of them, and the Mitzrayim are chasing hard behind them. And the pasuk says, "Vayiru ma'od," Klal Yisrael were very, very scared. "V'yitzaku bnei Yisrael Hashem," and they cried out to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. On the words, "Oparo hikri vayisu bnei Yisrael esenem v'hinei Mitzrayim noseya achareihem," Rashi says that the Egyptians were chasing Klal Yisrael b'leiv echad k'ish echad. That's last week's Sedra. Now, contrast that to this week's Sedra, Parshas Yisro. Vayisu meRefidim, they traveled from Refidim. Vayovo midbar Sinai vayachnu b'midbar, they came to Har Sinai. Vayichan Sham Yisrael neged hahar. This is it, one of the most momentous episodes in world history, this week's Sedra, of Matan Torah. And the pasuk tells us Vayichan Sham Yisrael neged hahar. And Rashi picks up on the fact that Vayichan is in the singular, and it's not Vayachanu. So Vayichan Sham Yisrael, says Rashi, ki ish echad b'leiv echad, like one person, hence the singular. But other encampments sadly did not have the same level of unity. There was discord, there was strife and argument, and therefore it was not the same as it was over here. And here it was unique because they had harmony and unity, and that's why it's in the Lashon of Yochid. But if you look carefully, in this week's Sedra, the Lashon of Chazal is Vayichan Sham Yisrael k'ish echad b'leiv echad, like one man with one heart. But in last week's Sedra, referring to the Mitzrayim chasing after Klal Yisrael, it's the reverse order. B'leiv echad k'ish echad. Why the difference? Why the change in order? So says the Avnei Nezer, I couldn't find it inside, but this is apparently what he said. If you think about it, when the Mitzrayim came in last week's Sedra, they came for a specific cause. The cause is to chase after Klal Yisrael and to either defeat them or to ideally try and bring them back to Mitzrayim to continue working for them. So when people unify for a specific cause or purpose, that's the b'leiv echad. That's the reason why they're getting together, and that makes them k'ish echad. So that's exactly what Chazal is saying in last week's Sedra, that the Mitzrayim are described as b'leiv echad. They were unifying for a specific cause or purpose, and that makes them k'ish echad. With Klal Yisrael, it's the opposite. They're united. There should be an achdus, despite any particular catalyst or trigger or cause or purpose. We are inherently one, and therefore it says k'ish echad b'leiv echad. So therefore, with Mitzrayim, they're only unifying because of the cause. It says b'leiv echad k'ish echad, but not so with Klal Yisrael. And what's the difference? Well, the difference quite simply is that when the cause goes, then disunity prevails. So with Mitzrayim, it says b'leiv echad k'ish echad because they were united in that purpose. But when the purpose goes, they're no longer united. But Klal Yisrael should be k'ish echad b'leiv echad. We are one, regardless of a specific cause or purpose or mission. We are inherently have that achdus. Hence the different expressions. Okay. Let's press on. Now, the next idea, it comes from the Aseret HaDibrus, and this is really the first of the Aseret HaDibrus, and there is a beautiful piece in the Darkei Musa, that's Rabbi Yaakov Naiman. He was one of the great Baalei Musa, Talmud of the Chofetz Chaim. He's got a beautiful sefer called Darkei Musa, and I want to go through a piece. It's a few paragraphs, but worth every single every single word. And also it touches on the Ibn Ezra that I mentioned last week. For the keen listeners who follows, they will note this. So, let's take a look. The Pasuk says, Anochi Hashem Elokecha asher tzitzicha me'eretz Mitzrayim mebeis avodim. As it were, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Emunah, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I took you out of Mitzrayim, his calling card is, I am the one who took you out of Mitzrayim, mebeis avodim. Interestingly, he doesn't describe himself as Anochi Hashem Elokecha, that I created the world. Why is it, discussed in the Darkei Musa, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu refers to himself as the person or the being that took us out of Mitzrayim? Well, what exactly is behind that? So let's take a look. Very, very interesting piece. Makshim Harishainim. Now this question is not the Darkei Musa's, this is an earlier question. He says, I am Ibn Ezra. Lomo hiski Anochi Hashem Elokecha asher tzitzicha me'eretz Mitzrayim v'lo yomer she'al sisi shamayim v'aretz. Why didn't the Aseret HaDibros begin, Anochi Hashem Elokecha she'al sisi shamayim v'aretz? That's who I am. V'nir lani v'staiti. In my humble opinion, I can attempt to answer as follows, the Taretz. Lahamin she'HaKadosh Baruch Hu boris hashamayim v'aretz. To believe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the heaven and earth, lo yitzricha Torah lo dienu. The Torah doesn't need really to tell us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the earth, the heavens and the earth. Why? That anyone who has a brain in his head, he has to understand that there is HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world. You don't need an enormous intelligence to know that. Anyone who's not a fool will know there has to be a creator. You can't have a building without a builder. Avram Avinu was as young as 3 years old, and he understood that there has to be a creator to the world. That really the intelligence of a 3-year-old is able to understand that there has to be a creator. And someone who does not recognize that there is a creator to the world, he's lacking intelligence. Is almost like he's animalistic. The pasuk says, Mefarish Rashi there, that an ox knows its master. That's referring to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. An ox works and listens to his master, and it doesn't. He knows that everything comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and even an ox knows that there is a Rebbeinu Shalom, that everything is there. Now, listen to this. This is amazing, because the Darkei Musa was, like I said, a Talmud. He was a Talmud in the Lomzi Yeshiva for many years. He then was close to many Gedolim, and particularly the Chofetz Chaim. And then he came to Eretz Yisrael, I think in 1934, 1935, and set up yeshivas there, and wrote his Darkei Musa. He says over Torah from what he heard directly from the Chofetz Chaim. And here's a good example. Paragraph 3. Shamaiti memeran Chofetz Chaim. I heard from the saintly Chofetz Chaim, Sha'amar b'shem HaMagid Midubna, who quoted an idea from the Dubna Magid. Kosuv du'u ki Hashem hu Elokim, hu oisanu v'loi anachnu amoi. Now that's what we say in Shachris every morning, in Mizmar L'Seida, just before Ashrei, before Yichoed, every single morning. Now, when we say du'u ki Hashem hu Elokim, hu oisanu v'loi anachnu amoi, lemila v'loi, that word v'loi, vov lamed vov, yesh kriyuk siv. There's a kriyuk siv. Hu v'loi, we read it, it says v'loi, v'hakri, hu v'loi with an aleph. Omar derech moshel. Now the Dubna Magid would say the following. Shnei anoshim holchel b'derech. Imagine the following story. 2 people were walking on the journey together. Upitem echod mishesh b'kisei. And one of the 2 people put his hand in his pocket. V'ro shechos la kesef. His money's gone. Oz tofas es chaveiroi. He then grabbed his friend and said, "You stole the money from me." The friend says, "Well, how do you know it was me?" Did you see me steal your money? Do I really need to see it? I know by itself that you stole it. There's no one else here. It's just you here. I didn't steal my own money. And therefore it has to be you. Kach Omar HaKosuv. That's Pshat. Du'u ki Hashem hu osonu, ki loy anachnu. It's loy with an aleph, anachnu. Ki anachnu lo osinus asmenu. We didn't create ourselves. We're not the builders of this palace. Imkain bevadai v'loy anachnu, and therefore you've got to say v'loy with a vav, v'loy anachnu, and therefore, as a result, we belong to Him. Anachnu shayachim l'Kadosh Baruch Hu. That's pshat in the Kriyuk Ksiv. Ki loy anachnu, that it wasn't us that built this world. We didn't create it, and therefore v'loy with a vav anachnu, i.e. we belong to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's his beautiful interpretation of that pasuk in Tehillim. Duki Hashem Elokim hu asanu v'loy anachnu. It's not us. It must be therefore v'loy with a vav. Avol. Next paragraph. Mashekash le'adam hu lehavin b'dvar manas maradei adam. What's difficult for a person to fathom is things that happen, not the world, but things that happen in life. Through history. The temptation is to think that it's our own initiative, innovation and might that has created everything. And therefore, when Yetzias Mitzrayim happens through Moshe Rabbeinu, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Moshe Rabbeinu, stretch out your hand, or kaches matcho, take your staff. We could mistakenly think that it was Moshe Rabbeinu who achieved all this. That I am your God who took you out of Mitzrayim, that there's no one else. He was just the vehicle of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's operation. Next paragraph, it says Kushas for Ibn Ezra. And that perhaps can answer the question of the Ibn Ezra, which we asked in last week's Parsha. Al Maimah Moshe Rabbeinu al Vashalom. He said in last week's Sedra, when they were at the Yam Suf, Hisyatzu ru'u es Yeshuas Hashem. Lama hu tzorech v'chol zeh. Why did he need to stand and say to Klal Yisrael, look and see the salvation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Halo hoyu am gadol v'rov. Why did they have to even daven? Why did they have to do that? Why did they fight back? Like we said last week. They're a nation of 600,000 men chasing after 600 chariots. They can easily overpower them, surely. Why did Moshe Rabbeinu have to say his Yatzu Ru'us Yeshuas Hashem? Umataretz. And Ibn Ezra answers, Ki lo hayu melumdei milchama, that they weren't trained in warfare. V'lo orev libam lagesh samilchama, they weren't comfortable to go into battle. And therefore they needed a nes shelo k'derech hateva, because they didn't have the mentality to fight, like we explained last week. The difficulty is that there's a problem with that answer, as the Ibn Ezra himself acknowledges. But they did fight with Amalek soon afterwards, so for fighting against the Mitzrayim they didn't have the ability, but fighting for Amalek a short while later they did. For Tiretz, and the Ibn Ezra himself answers, the truth is they didn't have the ability to fight Amalek either, and therefore they needed the tefillah of Moshe Rabbeinu. That's the Ibn Ezra. Al zeh omar ha'ksav sofer. The Ksav Sofer says on that Ibn Ezra, Umuvan lakol ki ein terez ze maspik. That answer regarding Amalek is not really sufficient. To gam kan hoyle lispalel, because he needed to daven here as well. On Mataritz and the Ksav Sofer answers, Ki lo rotzu lasos milchama Mitzrayim. The reason why they didn't want to fight Mitzrayim is mipnei shelo rotzu lios kofu tova, because they didn't want to show a lack of gratitude. They didn't want to be ingrates. Shekosov lo sasav Mitzri keger yisab aretz. So how can I raise my hand against the Mitzrayim? I've lived in their country. I've experienced their hospitality. At least in the early years, it was not persecution. But I've lived in their land. I've benefited from them. How can I raise my hand against them? Would that not be ungrateful? Last paragraph. Ef Shaloma is possible to say. You know why they shouldn't fight back? Because they might lead them to believe that it's my own strength and initiative and power that has achieved this. And that's a slippery slope. of Yesias Mitzrayim, Ratz HaKadosh Baruch Hu sheikava b'libim emunah berura. And when it came to Yesias Mitzrayim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to instill in us emunah berura, perfect, clear faith. But once we saw the downfall of Mitzrayim, and they got to that level of perfect emunah, then there's no concern anymore. They've achieved that level of emunah, and therefore fighting with Amalek afterwards, it doesn't have any concern. We're not worried. So, says the Darkei Musa, a very beautiful piece. Why is it that the Anoich Hashem Lekecha, the first of the Atzeres HaDibros, begins Anoich Hashem Lekecha Shel Sisi Mitzrayim? Why doesn't it say Anoich Hashem Lekecha Shel Sisi Shamayim V'Aretz? He explains that when it comes to creation of the world, even the child ultimately knows that you can't have a building without a builder. Of course, HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world. Like he says, even a 3-year-old could really come to that himself. The danger is that something of human nature that happens in the course of history, we might be mistaken to think that this is our own initiative, power, might that has created it. And therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, no, it's all me. Don't think it was anybody else, it was me. And he wants to make sure that that is clear. And he says, with that, we can answer the second question that Ibn Ezra asked last week. Why didn't they fight back at the Yam Suf? So Ibn Ezra says it's because they had a slave mentality. What about Amalek? Yeah, okay, they needed Moshe Rabbeinu's tefillah. But the Ksaf Sofer doesn't like that answer. So we can see that you can answer it in a different way. That once, the whole concern they shouldn't fight back is they shouldn't be ungrateful. That's the Ksaf Sofer. Or the way he says, the way the Darkei Musa says, the reason why they didn't fight back is because otherwise people will think it was us. We beat the Mitzrayim. It's nothing to do with God. They'll say, Koichi ve'etzim yadi. But therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't want them to fight back. He wanted to continue all the Nisim of Mitzrayim. He split the Yam Suf, and therefore we see, Vayaminu b'Hashem Moshe Avdo, this is all HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And once they've achieved that level, then they can fight with Amalek because he's not worried anymore about Koichi ve'etzim yadi. Very beautiful piece of the Darkei Musa. Okay, let's just finish off with one more short idea. This is the end of the Atzeres HaDibros. There is a very intriguing rush. Now, I think I did say this some years ago, but it's a very beautiful piece, and I'll just say it again briefly. It's worth repeating. I said it, I think, 4 or 5 or 6 years ago. There's a rush. The rush says in this week's Sedra, towards the end of Atzeres HaDibros, he says, Me''alef ta'anoichi ad l'recha, yesh taryag oisius keneged taryag mitzvahs. He says an astonishing thing. From the first aleph in Anoich Hashem Elokecha, beginning of the Atzeres HaDibros, in up to the final wording of the Atzeres HaDibros, which is Lo Sachmoid, the 10th commandment, which finishes Lo Sachmoid Beis Recha, Lo Sachmoid Ish Recha, Va'avde V'amosav V'shor V'chamara V'chol Asher L'Recha, until the final Chof. There are 613 letters which correspond to the 613 mitzvahs in the Torah. Amazing. So that Rosh itself is worth hearing. 613 letters in the entire Atzeres HaDibros, corresponding, of course, to the 613 commandments. Now, the Sefer Ma'adani Melech says something fabulous, just fabulous. The Shulchan Aruch says, in Choshen Mishpat, random, nothing to do with the Atzeres HaDibros, there's a rule in Hilchas Shtaros. The rule is that in the final line of the shtar, you've got to summarize the main body of the shtar of the contract. Okay, that's the rule in Choshen Mishpat. Now, says the Ma'adani Melech, Lo Sachmoid, on the words Lo Sachmoid, he says, Mashesiyim ba'Atzeres HaDibros b'tevis l'recha, that which we conclude the final of the Atzeres HaDibros, the 10th of the Atzeres HaDibros, Lo Sachmoid, with don't covet anything, not his wife, not his servants, not his shor, not his chamar, v'chol asher l'recha, says the Ma'adani Melech, nir eladaiti. To who al pi the paskim b'choshen mishpat. You know why it ends with the words v'chol asher l'recha? Because it's a manifestation of this halacha of tzorich lahachzir men yonish shtar b'shita achrona. You have to summarize the shtar in the last line. The tzrichin lahachzir men yonish shtar b'shita achrona. V'hinei yodua ma mechazal asher v'havta l'recha kamoich zeh klal gadol b'Torah. The Gemara says in Shabbos that v'havta l'recha kamoich is an important klal rule in the entire Torah. B'hai ger shebor lifnei Hillel. legayrei, almanas lelamdo kol haTorah kula. The famous story of the ger, the convert, who came to Hillel and said, I want to convert me, almanas, that I learn all of Torah while standing on one leg. And he said, Zil Gemar. And Hillel famously said, okay, I'll teach you the Torah while standing on one leg. That don't do to your friend what you wouldn't like done to you. The rest is Pirush, go learn it. Nimtza. You see that the entire body of Torah is included in the words V'ahavta kamecha. Al kain, therefore, Messiah ba'aseres hadibros b'teves l'recha. We conclude the Aseres HaDibros with the words L'recha, L'ramez al mitzvah zu, to hint at this mitzvah. Shavhavta recha kamecha, ha'klulim mitol ha'ktorah. V'zeh v'chol ha'shel l'recha. That's alluded to in v'chol ha'shel l'recha. The v'chol ha'shel l'recha is the last line of the shtar. The Aseres HaDibros is the whole shtar. V'chol ha'shel l'recha is the last line of the shtar. And that is a summary of the entire Torah. How so? Because the whole of the Aseres HaDibros is 613 letters with 613 mitzvahs. And V'chol HaShel L'Recha is a summary of all of it. How so? Ki tevas v'chol, when it says V'chol HaShel L'Recha, v'chol is an atrikon, V'ahavta L'Recha kamecha. V'ahavta L'Recha kamecha, zeh klal gadol b'Torah. And therefore it's a summary of the entire Torah. So you see that the last words, V'chol HaShel L'Recha, is V'chol is V'ahavta L'Recha kamecha, and l'recha and v'ahavta l'recha, and do exactly as you do to your friends. So you see, amazingly, that the last words of the Aseres HaDibros is a summary of the Shita Achrona of the entire Torah, which is essentially encapsulated in the Aseres HaDibros, which is with its 613 letters, which represent 613 mitzvahs. Okay, so there we have it. 4 ideas from this week's Sedra. Let's just summarize quickly. Number 1, how can the Gemara say that Gnai hu l'Moshe v'shishim ribu l'shalom baruch Shabo Yisro v'Baruch Hashem? That how can it be that it's a disgrace for Moshe Rabbeinu and for Klal Yisrael that no one said thank you until Yisro came along? But Moshe Rabbeinu and Klal Yisrael said Shiur in last week's Sedra. Of course they said thank you. Lots of answers to the question. The Ksaf Sofer answers that Yisro's thanks was different, because Yisro's thanks was for something that didn't happen to him, but happened to somebody else. That's a different level of thanks. To be so empathetic that you feel somebody else's simcha, and Rahman al you feel somebody else's pain and difficult times, that's real friendship. And that's really what Yisro was doing. He was giving thanks for something that happened not to him, but to other people. That's a different level. Then we explained the Avnei Nezer, how come with Mitzrayim it says Belev Echad K'ish Echad, and with Klal Yisrael it says K'ish Echad Belev Echad. The answer is that for some people, they unify for a specific cause or purpose. But when the cause goes, disunity prevails. But Klal Yisrael are inherently united, without any particular catalyst or trigger or purpose. And therefore we are K'ish Echad, Belev Echad. Then we discussed the Darkei Musa, Ani Hashem Lekecha. He asks the Ibn Ezra's Kasha, why is it Ani Hashem Lekecha, Shesisich Meretz Mitzrayim, Beis Avodim, why doesn't it say Ani Hashem Lekecha, Shel Sisi Shemayim V'aretz? And his beautiful approach that really anybody can understand that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world. You go out, this didn't happen by itself, not a chance. But on people couldn't be misled to believe that it's our own efforts that achieves it. And therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu signs off with that. That's how he describes himself. And that, he says, perhaps answers the Ksaf Sofer's Kasha on the Ibn Ezra. The Ibn Ezra asks, why didn't they fight back? So they said because they didn't have they had a slave mentality, etc., etc. How come they fought with Amalek? They had to daven. It wasn't really them. That was the Ibn Ezra. The Ksaf Sofer doesn't like that answer and says because it would be ungrateful to fight back. But the Darkei Musa explains, no, the reason why they didn't fight back is because it was dangerous. Because they might come to think, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I'm not letting you fight back because you might misunderstand that you're doing it. And therefore, I'm going to do miracles here at the Yam Suf. I'll split the sea, and you'll go through, and you'll recognize that it's me. Once they get to that recognition, and Vayamin B'Hashem of Moshe Avdei, then we can let them fight with Amalek. They're not going to make a mistake thinking Koichi V'Yotzim Yodi. Beautiful. And then this amazing Rosh. The Rosh says there are 613 letters in the entire Aseres HaDibros, which connected, of course, Taryag Mitzvahs. And the last letter says the Madani Melech V'chol HaShel L'Recha is a manifestation of the rule in Chesed Mishpat. You need to summarize the main body of the shtar in the final line, and that's exactly what we're doing. V'chol asher l'recha is Rosh Hashanah v'ahavta l'recha kamocha, which is a summary of the entire Torah.